Welcome to this IFL's webinar about a new resource that we would like to share with you. So it's an IFL guide for libraries on rights retention and secondary publishing rights. And these are really very important topics nowadays, and we wanted to help you explain those topics to your library colleagues and also to your researchers, university administrators, and anyone else who is interested. And this resource is available as a PDF, and there is also an online version where you can see a little bit more details. Today we will present it. We will also talk why rights retention and secondary publishing rights are important topics. You've probably seen already that we started including rights retention in our model open science policy templates. If you're based in Europe and if you receive European funding, then Horizon Europe requires researchers to retain rights. There are also other funders who require that. Coalition S has an excellent rights retention strategy as an action point. So it's really a big topic in Europe already, but also in Africa. A lot of Kenyan policies have been including rights retention already for many years, like Harvard University does. So it's really, it goes beyond just Europe. And I'll hand over to my colleague Milica, who will start talking about rights retention, and then Teresa will continue on the secondary publishing right. And maybe if you have some burning questions after Milica's presentation, we can answer them. But let's have a proper discussion after Teresa's presentation, because there might be some connections in the talks. So over to you, Milica. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And I will try to explain. I will talk about rights retention, and Teresa will focus more on secondary publishing rights. So these issues are quite complex. So I've been struggling when talking to research communities, to local open access publishers, etc. I've been struggling to explain this because it's a legal topic, it's a legal issue, and you know, when it comes to legal issues, legal people don't tend to be very simple when explaining stuff, and sometimes it's very complicated to understand what they are trying to tell you. So this presentation will be quite generic. It might look superficial and simplified, but the idea is to explain the basic concept, and then in the end we will see the explainer, the guide that we created, that is also quite basic, but it provides links to multiple resources that are more detailed, that are more specific, regional specific, country specific, or topic specific. So why are we talking about today's topic? What's the source of the problem? The source of the problem is the copyright transfer that occurs at the moment of signing an agreement, a publishing agreement. For research papers, you know that the authors are required by publishers to sign an agreement, a publishing agreement, which is in case of subscription-based. And other commercial publishers, it usually requires copyright transfer. And this is on the right, you can see some typical clauses from such an agreement. So it's about the monetary rights. The publisher gets the right to exploit for a long period throughout the copyright term the work of the authors, of researchers, which is very often publicly funded. And this right is exclusive, it's worldwide, it's irrevocable, and the transfer is full. And now, recently, they started limiting even the right of the authors to share their author-accepted manuscripts. so this is what you deposit in the repository when exercising green open access, they've started limiting this right as well by adding such clauses that the exclusivity to all rights retained by the author and by each co-author in the preprint or accepted manuscript. For example, with Springer, you can't publish an author-accepted manuscript under a CC license, which is quite a new limitation. It started some 2 years ago. They started to apply this principle. So this is a problem. So you can't share your work because the copyright is transferred to publishers. What researchers don't know, they are not legal experts, and very often their awareness of legal issues and copyright issues is quite limited. So they don't know that, they assume that copyright is always owned by the publishers. They, for example, they are not aware of the things that are signing when signing these agreements. They don't read them carefully. But even in some cases, even when they don't sign an agreement, they are not aware that the right remains with them. They are not aware that this is not automatically like, publishing having all the rights. So they also believe that if they signed off their copyright, they cannot share their work. And they also believe that in order to publish, they must sign such an agreement, that there is no way out of this. So our explainer tends to show that this is not always like this, that there are legal mechanisms that enable sharing even when such agreements are signed. So rights retention is usually a policy instrument. It's been around for about 2 decades, and you can see, we will share the presentations. You will see that there are many examples. For example, in the US in 2004, 2008, some universities and also funders started introducing these rights retention requirements. So this rights retention requirement means that when entering a publication agreement with a publisher, authors retain some rights in their work. Usually they don't retain all the rights, but they retain sufficient rights to share the work. And the purpose of this rights retention is to make sure that the work can be immediately open access. Basically, one of the earliest example is a Harvard model policy. And there is a whole line of Harvard-style open access policies. And you can see on the left a model policy. And this is a kind of policy where the institution directly retains the right. So it's associated with those clauses that are related to work for hire, etc. So institutions directly retain the rights, and author indirectly retain the rights to share. And it's explained in this policy example, and also in the notes to this policy example, the logic, the rationale behind this is explained. This is a kind of specific to the United States. It's related to their to the way their institutions are structured and to their legislation. Another instrument that might be that you may be familiar with is the SPARC Author Addendum to Publication Agreement. It's basically an addendum to the publishing agreement that is submitted, that is offered to publishers. So the article gets accepted, and then before signing the agreement, the publication agreement, the author sends this addendum to the publisher, saying that they have a kind of mandate to share their work, and that they will share their work, the author accepted manuscript, usually in a repository under these and that conditions. So this is another instrument that is quite widely used, and it's not specific to the US. It's been used worldwide. Another one that is also quite well known, and it's more recent, it's the Coalition as Rights Retention Strategy, and it's applied in the European Union, and in some countries also introduced such clauses in their policies, in their institutional policies mostly, but also in funder policies, because this is basically a funder policy. And it's probably the best documented of these rights retention policies with the supporting materials, and it's probably the most convenient to apply. So it says that authors must retain sufficient rights in order to share their work immediately at the moment of publication. It should be at least the author-accepted manuscript, preferably the version of record, but at least the author-accepted manuscript, and it must be under the CC BY license without an embargo period. And there is an instruction how to do this. It's always recommended to inform the publishers that there is a kind of mandate that authors have to meet this requirement, and then the authors should add these specific rights retention language to their when submitting a manuscript, and a license to this manuscript, and they should add this license to all subsequent versions of their manuscript. And eventually, when the manuscript gets accepted for publication, they should make it available in a repository under the CC BY license. So in our explainer, we simplified all these multiple options and provided a kind of a generic explanation how to do this. So the main points of this generic explanation is that authors need to retain sufficient rights, and there is one very important thing, which is a legal concept. This is the legal precedence of a prior license or agreed obligations. So if a publisher requires authors to share their manuscript or work under certain conditions, this is considered to be a prior license existing before the manuscript is submitted to publisher, and it has legal precedence over any agreements that are signed later. So this is the main rationale behind this rights retention, especially in this Plan S model. So in our generic explanation, one way to achieve rights retention is this basically what's suggested by Plan S. So inform the publisher, add the license to your manuscript, keep on adding it to all subsequent versions, and then share it in the repository without an embargo under the CC BY license. The other option is to wait until the manuscript is accepted and then use this author addendum, just like in the Spark author addendum. Coalition S provides very good resources, pre-submission templates, the language, the phrase that should be used in the manuscript, cover link, letter templates, etc. And it's highly recommended to consult these resources, even if you're not based in Europe, because they are generally very, very useful. What are the benefits of rights retention? By retaining your rights, you basically take control of your copyright, and you take control of the way your work is shared. You're able to share your work under an open license, and then you encourage reuse, and then you gain this wide exposure and dissemination of your work. And also, it's important to know this because by doing this, you can publish in whatever journal is important for your promotion. So you can meet promotion requirements, and still you can comply with open access policies, institutional policies or national policies, and you can share your work as well. And also you can comply with funder policies, because an increasing number of funders are adopting such policies, and some of these are even based on this Coalition S model. So here are some examples. In France, they are applying this Plan S recommendations, and this is a very good guide explaining in a very simple language how to exercise your rights and how to retain your rights. There are many university institutional policies that are requiring rights retention. I'm citing here the University of Edinburgh, not because this is the specific in any respect, but because they're very interesting resources, a very interesting blog post, and also a podcast explaining the way that they are, the efforts that are making to support the researchers in implementing these policies, because institutional support is very important. It's much easier to implement, to exercise the rights if there is an institution behind you, supporting you and informing publishers about the policies and providing legal advice to researchers. So AFL is supporting policy development in many countries, and this is a kind, in this slide you can see a kind of wording that is used in policies. In Botswana, the policy has been adopted, and this is the phrasing that they are using. In Malawi, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone, there is a draft, and in this draft, it's very simple language. It says that immediate open access should be allowed, enabled under the CC BY license, and that full text must be openly available immediately, that there is no embargo, and that researchers are required to retain ownership of copyright in order to enable this early sharing and open access. So what can you do as a librarian, because our guide is primarily targeting librarians? It's very important to raise awareness at the institution that the policy is should be adopted to support researchers. And if you don't have, just try advocating for the adoption of such a policy. It's very important to raise the awareness among researchers that they don't need to sign off all of their rights. Even if your institution doesn't intend to implement a policy or to adopt one very soon, it's very important to start raising awareness, because we actually need to make a culture shift in order to make open access available and rights retention available. So it's very important, with or without policy, this is crucial. Also, it's very important because you have some practical things. You need to know some practical things when implementing these policies, and it's very important to share experience with institutions that are already doing this, that already have a kind of expertise to do this. You may not have legal experts who can support you, so it's very important to network with the others and to be aware of their experience and to learn using this experience. Also, it's very important to advocate for legislative solutions, and Teresa will talk about one of such legislative solutions. So this is what we can do. We can provide training as well, and this is all for me. These are resources. You will find them on the page that Irina has shown. And over to you, Teresa.
Thanks a lot, Milica, and I would like to thank Spark Europe and other colleagues from the Knowledge Rights 21 project for providing their feedback, and thank you for joining today, Eva. Good to see you. Over to you, Teresa.
Okay, thank you very much. So can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Okay, so thank you very much, and thanks to everybody for joining. Thanks to Milica for explaining the rights retention part of the AIFL guide. As she explains, that the guide is like a high-level sort of a guide to explain the principles involved in rights retention and secondary publishing rights. And to try and simplify and explain in an easy way what are the concepts behind these two initiatives. So I'm going to talk about the secondary publishing rights, which is separate but complementary to rights retention. But both support the adoption and the promotion of open science. Sometimes rights retention is described as a bottom-up approach, and the secondary publishing rights are a top-down approach. So you can imagine when you have both approaches in working in parallel, that they will meet in the middle, and then you will be able to cover all angles and to support your researchers in a good way. So The first thing is, what is a secondary publishing right? Well, it's the legal right of authors or their institutions, if they are the copyright owner, to make a work openly available after or in parallel to the publication of a formal version. Milica mentioned a couple of those formal versions as examples. Usually it's the peer-reviewed authors accepted manuscripts, the AAM, or it could be the final typeset version known as the version of record. So in other words, secondary publishing right is a legislative measure that enables publicly funded research to be made available in open access under certain conditions that are set out in the law. Now, secondary publishing rights can be found in a variety of national laws. So sometimes you'll find it it'll be in the copyright law. In other countries, it's in the law on science. In other countries, like in Belgium, for example, it's in the economics law, but it can also be in the law on culture. But there's no right or wrong approach. It really depends on the context and perhaps the motivation for having this secondary publishing right as to where it will be found in national law. Whoops. So what does a secondary publishing right do? Well, it enables the author or the institution to manage and enforce their rights in support of open access with the full backing of the law. So you have a legal right to make your work available. It ensures that published, publicly funded work is openly available and ideally reusable, even in the absence of an open access publishing agreement with the publisher. So if you haven't managed to negotiate an open access publishing agreement, you will still be able to make your work available if you have such a secondary publishing right, in accordance with any conditions set out in the law. And in this way, it helps to increase the impact of published research by helping to guarantee wide dissemination and reuse through open access. So which countries have a secondary publishing right? Well, a growing number of countries in Europe have adopted a secondary publishing right. So we have Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, France, Germany, Netherlands, and Slovenia. And you can see from the dates there that they have been adopting secondary publishing rights for a number of years. Now, these developments have happened through, there has been a process happening in Europe that has been encouraging these initiatives. So for example, in 2020, a number of research organizations called on the European Commission to propose legislation ensuring that researchers will retain the rights to share their publicly funded peer-reviewed research findings. Then in 2021, the European Commission, in its policy agenda for the European research area for the biennium 2022 to 2024, proposed that the EU legislative and regulatory framework for copyright and data is fit for research. And as part of that action, they undertook to examine SPR provisions that have been already enacted by member states in their laws. And in 2023, the EU Council, which is the highest decision-making body in the EU, that's comprised of the governments, and they welcomed the introduction of SPR by member states in their national copyright laws. So as an outcome of those policy agendas, the European Commission then published in March of this year a study on improving access to and reuse of research results, publications, and data for scientific purposes. And in that report, one of the issues that they looked at was secondary publishing rights, where they looked at and at having an EU-wide approach to the introduction of such rights. And the reason for that was to reduce fragmentation and encourage harmonization in national approaches. So what we can see from those countries that have introduced an SPR in their national law is that there are differences in how they have been introduced. So there are differences in the scope, differences in the embargo periods, differences in how the material can be used. So in order to encourage a greater level of harmonization, the report proposes 5 policy options for the introduction of secondary publishing rights. And these are to include a broad range of scientific output. So not only journal articles, which is what we can see in some of the laws. They also recommend to relax the threshold requirement for public funding to 50% or less. They suggest to expand the scope of the material to include the version of record, which they say is essential for citation purposes. They also call to minimize the embargo period so that there should be no embargo or only a short embargo period. And also to allow all types of uses. So they observe that the restriction in some cases to non-commercial purposes seems to be outdated and overly restrictive and doesn't really reflect how research is currently undertaken. So I'll just give you 2 examples of a secondary publishing right in a national law. The first example is from Bulgaria, which is the most recent example. It was adopted in November last year. And this example comes from the copyright law. So the Article 60 in the Copyright Act introduced 3 new provisions. Subsection 2 sets out that the author shall retain the right to make their work available to the public in repositories for non-commercial purposes. So there you see the non-commercial limitation after its acceptance. Then importantly, they also say that any arrangement which prevents or restricts this sharing shall be null and void. So in other words, the right that's given to you in paragraph 2 cannot be taken away by a license. So this is what we would call contract override. And that's important. And then also the publisher cannot impose restrictions on the publication of a work solely on the grounds that it has been already published in a repository. So you can get more information on the Bulgarian law and an analysis of all of the provisions in a blog that was published by Knowledge Rights. And I've given the link at the end of the slide here, and we'll send you the slides as well later, so you can check out that link. Another example is from Slovenia, and this was also adopted in 2023. And this example comes from the law on science, the science law. So it's not in the copyright law, but there is a provision in it. It's part of a policy and a law on science. And in that policy, Article 6 deals with the copyright management of scientific publications. So here it says that copyright in scientific publications may only be transferred to third parties on a non-exclusive basis. That the authors shall publish scientific publications under an open license that allows anyone to freely use, modify, and share in accordance with the principles of science research ethics. And they give an example of an open license, such as Creative Commons. In other articles, they define research results, they define the requirements for open access to scientific publications, and they also include an article on the management of copyright in research data and other research results. And you can find more information on the Slovenia example on a blog that was written by OpenAir. So how does a researcher, should a researcher make use of a secondary publishing right, or indeed how should a librarian assist their researchers in making use of a secondary publishing right? Well, first thing is to check if your national law provides for a secondary publishing right. And as mentioned, you should check, it could be in a number of different laws: copyright law, science law, economics, or culture. Now, if your law does include such a provision, be aware of any conditions that might apply. So it might set out minimum percentage of public funding required. It might set out embargo periods or the type of scholarly works covered. And then the author would deposit the author's accepted manuscript or the version of record in a repository in accordance with any conditions set out in the law. So we would encourage you to take action to learn more about these national initiatives. And there's a link there to where you can read some of the national initiatives that was been put together by LIBER and Knowledge Rights. We encourage you to raise awareness of the opportunities for researchers and also the challenges, and to start working towards the adoption of strong SPR legislation in your country. So that would include elements such as zero embargo. So that would allow immediate open access and reuse by means of an open license, all types of research outputs and all types of uses as well. Because if your legislators get guidance from the community that this will contribute towards better drafting and more effective laws in this area. So what is IFL doing? Well, we are raising awareness in IFL's network, as Milica mentioned, and our first step is to prepare the IFL Guide for Libraries that we are launching today on rights retention and secondary publishing rights. We also offer support to library consortia in IFL partner countries. So if there are any questions or if you need help or advice or anything, you can get in touch. We are also considering, from a copyright point of view, we are considering introducing a new provision on secondary publishing rights on IFL's draft law on copyright. And this is a draft law that's used by legislators and governments all around the world when they are amending and updating their copyright laws. So that's something that we will consider looking at as a next step. And we are, of course, cooperating with our partners and allies in Europe and beyond on best practices. And we know there's a lot of work going on, and you know, we're happy to be part of that conversation. And that's the end of it. So I hope that that's been useful. And now we can hand over to any questions. Irina, thank you.
Please, colleagues, you can use the Q&A, or you can raise your hand, and we'll make you a presenter and you'll be able to speak. So if you have any questions to Milica or Teresa, they were the main authors of this IFL's guide. And Teresa is from IFL's copyright program. Milica and I are from open access program, and these topics are cross-cutting topics across the programs. Like Teresa said, we'll be collaborating on them across IFL's programs, and we're here also to support you in anything related to those topics. So maybe we also have a question to you. What else would you need to feel a little bit more confident talking about those topics? What kind of support you would like to get from us? I see there is a question from Dennis. Well, as far as I comment, surely publishers are fighting this, and this will have a huge impact on their income and ability to use books in databases.
So if I may say, some early monitoring results relating to the implementation of rights retention policies show that they are actually effective. Although there are many unpleasant situations, for example, when you encounter, I don't know, a wording in the publishing policy saying that they wouldn't be accepting the rights retention language. The logic behind all these rights retention efforts is that publishers are more likely to accept individual requests and requests relating to policies than, for example, having a kind of an umbrella policy allowing such a thing. So basically, the monitoring results show that these policies are effective, although it might seem difficult at the first glance to implement them.